Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Turn to your neighbor and shout to them, that's it. That's it. That's all. That's all. There is no more. There is no more. Got a neighbor on the other side, shout to them, that's it. That's it. That's all. That's all. There is no more. There is no more. Amen. You may be seated in the Lord's presence. That's what I want to talk about this morning. That's it. That's all. There is no more. 1 Kings chapter 3 explains that Solomon, who is also the author of Ecclesiastes, was the wisest man who ever lived. 1 Kings 3 also teaches us that Solomon was the wealthiest man who ever lived. I encourage you to read 1 Kings chapter 3. It explains that he was the wisest man who ever lived and the wealthiest man who ever lived. But by the time you get to 1 Kings chapter 11, you discover that arguably Solomon was the worldliest man who ever lived. He was a wise man, he was a wealthy man, but he was a worldly man. Solomon had literally 700 wives and 300 concubines. A concubine was a wife who didn't rise to the same level as the primary wife. She had no say in the making of family legal decisions. She did not carry the same rights and privileges as the primary wife. But he had 700. What can you tell a man about relationships when he got 7? Can you imagine what his bathroom looked like? All the stuff hanging over the curtain rod. 700 wives. He had 1,000 women. Now he could afford them financially, but he could not afford them spiritually. Because 1 Kings chapter 11 says that when he got old, his wives, because they came from 5 different spiritual climates where they served 5 different religious entities other than God himself. When Solomon got old, his wives turned his heart away from God, so that the wisest man who ever lived and the wealthiest man who ever lived, because he was also the worldliest man who ever lived, he almost became the most wicked man who ever lived. To the extent, Sanaya, that he erected places of worship for the 5 idol gods that his wives served. And I want to encourage you to read this single book of the Bible. There are only 12 chapters where Solomon summarizes all that he had learned through his lifetime with his wisdom, his wealth, his worldliness, and ultimately his wickedness. His summation, as he concludes all of these chapters, his summation is found in verse 13 and verse 14. The primary or central focus of the book of Ecclesiastes is vainness. We would refer to it as vanity. He uses that word over and over again in this book, the word vanity. I would call it vainness. Pastor, how do you define that? Anything you are doing that is not centered around God is all in vain. Hear me when I tell you. Anything you're doing, if God himself is not the ultimate and central focus, it is all in vain. And by the time you get to verse 13 and verse 14, Solomon presents his closing arguments and breaks them into three separate and distinct statements. I want to share those statements with you, and then I'm headed to my seat. Here's the first one. Just because you got by doesn't mean you'll get away. Just because you got by does not mean you will get away. After Solomon describes essentially everything under the sun in chapter 1 through chapter 12, all the way up to verse 12, he then says in verse 13, let's hear the conclusion of the whole matter. He says, with all of my wisdom, with all of my wealth, with all of my worldliness that led to my wickedness, let me boil it down, Solomon says, in 2 verses. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Fear God. Minister Clark, let me be the first to admit that I have been a part of a group of clergy that has misrepresented what it means to fear God. Normally, when we talk about fearing God, we say that it's not that we're supposed to shriek in fear away from him. We say that we are supposed to have a reverential awe for God. That means that we stand reverently in his presence as he manifests himself. And boy, that sounds good. We are to fear God in a reverential sense. And that's cool if we were looking at the noun form of the verb fear. Here, this verb is taken from the Hebrew word yareh, which is spelled Y-A-R-A, and it literally means to be afraid. In Genesis chapter 3, when God came walking into the garden in the cool of the day, and he said, Adam, where are you? Adam responded, I hid myself because I was naked, and when King James Version says, when I heard your voice, it literally translates, when I heard your sound, I was afraid, and I hid myself. That word afraid is the same Hebrew verb that exists in Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13. What are you saying, Pastor Thorpe? When it comes to God, be afraid, be very afraid. Sister Esther, I had to think about something this week in studying this text day after day after day, and my conviction was, Thorpe, you've been preaching this wrong all of these years. And I said, yes, Lord, I understand. He said, Thorpe, not only have you been preaching it wrong, you know you've been preaching it wrong. I said, well, but Lord, what you mean? He said, Thorpe, you've been telling people that the same way that we should fear or have a reverence for God is the same way that you had a fear and reverence for your parents. I said, yes, sir, that's what I've been telling people. He said, Thorpe, you know that ain't the truth. I said, Lord, what do you mean? He said, you not only had a reverence for your parents, you were scared. I said, you know what, Lord? You're right. I was terrified of my parents. Not terrified of them harming me, I was terrified that if they caught me in my wrong, the consequences would be severe. And therefore, I was afraid. My parents scared me straight. Some fear is healthy. Mr. Ralph, we say sometimes, I ain't scared of nobody, I ain't scared of nothing. Leave here, get on Interstate 75, be doing 80 in a 75-mile-an-hour zone, see a state trooper in the median, and as you pass by, see them start their vehicle and pull out behind you. You be sweating bullets. Armpits go to itching. Hey, you turn the radio off, you tell everybody in the car to be quiet. Why? You ain't scared of nothing. Why we got to be quiet? Why are you looking in the rearview mirror so much? If you ain't scared of nothing, truth is, when it comes to God, not only should you be afraid, you should be very afraid. In Exodus chapter 32, after God's people had been delivered from their captivity in Egypt, Moses goes to the top of a mountain and receives some tablets of stone that God himself had written on. When Moses came back down out of the mountain, he had been gone for just 40 days. The more than 1 million people that he had left in the valley, the same group that he had just delivered from slavery and bondage, that group was dancing around some golden figurines, claiming that the figurines were the God who delivered them. Some translations say that they were dancing so vigorously until they had disrobed themselves. Moses had just spent 40 days with God, only to come back to his people and find them dancing naked around golden figurines, telling the figurines, we are thankful because you brought us out of hundreds of years of bondage. And Moses said, the devil is a lie. He became so incensed until the priceless tablets of stone that he had been given, he dashed them down. Then he went, took those golden figurines, had them heated in fire until they could be dried and crushed into powder. And he poured the powder in water and made them drink it. In response to that, God killed 3,000 men. Be afraid. Be very afraid. In Numbers chapter 12, the same Moses married a woman of Ethiopian descent, a chocolate sister. His brother Aaron and his sister Miriam did not approve of the interracial relationship, and they murmured against Moses. Isn't it funny that when people get a chance to talk about you, they bring up stuff that ain't got nothing to do with the normal conversation? Husband and wife arguing over dinner, all of a sudden it comes out, I can't stand your brother. What that got to do? That ain't got nothing to do with pork chops. Miriam must have been the primary murmurer, because their complaint became, who does Moses think he is, as if God only speaks to him? God can speak to us too, is what Miriam said. When God got word of Miriam and Aaron's murmuring, he called a meeting. God himself said, Moses, you come. Miriam, you come. Aaron, you come. The three of them presented themselves before the Lord. The Lord says, in the past, when I wanted to talk to a prophet, I'll speak to them through dreams and visions. He said, but my servant Moses, when it's time for me to talk to him, I talk to him mouth to mouth and face to face. God said, where did you get the nerve from to speak against my servant Moses? And instantaneously, Miriam's body became leprous. It was so leprous until it looked like the flesh of an unborn baby who had tragically passed away in the womb. Moses goes to God and prays that he would take away the leprosy. And God said if her daddy had spit in her face, she would be unclean for 7 days. In other words, I ain't moving nothing. For the next 7 days, Miriam carried the most dreaded disease that was a part of their culture. Your flagrant sin makes God angry. And you need to find yourself at the place of being afraid. Because here's what we say. I did it on Monday. Ain't nothing happened yet. I did it in November. Ain't nothing happened yet. Maybe I can do whatever I want to do. No, the truth is, just because you got by does not mean you will get away. Solomon says, listen, I'm wiser than y'all. I'm wealthier than y'all. I've been more worldly than y'all. I even became more wicked than y'all. He said, let me save you some trouble. Fear God. Fear God. Some stuff you need not do because you are afraid of the consequences that God can produce. Some of us been covered so long, we don't think we can be uncovered. You didn't hear what I said. Some of us been covered so long, we don't think we can be uncovered. Would you pause just a moment to think about what your life would look like if the Lord uncovered you? You say, Pastor, that was years ago. Not all of it. You say, Pastor, that's a skeleton in my closet itching to come outside. Some of them ain't skeletons. Some of them still got plenty of meat on them. Breathing and carrying on. Just because you got by does not mean you'll get away. Well, Thorpe, what is the second statement in Solomon's closing arguments? His second statement is this: stick to the script. Stick to the script. Solomon says, if you want to know how to be successful, if you want to know how to live your life to the glory of God, fear him and stick to the script. He says it in verse 13, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. He's saying if you want to be blessed, stick to the script. Well, Devon, one of the things that has absolutely spoiled me that my bank provides is mobile deposits. Have mercy, Lord. That means when I get a check, I don't have to go to the bank. I can sit in my living room take my cell phone, take a picture of the front of the check, a picture of the back of the check, verify that it has been deposited, and then I can rip the check to shreds. The reason I rip the check to shreds, because I may see that thing a week later and forget what I did a week before. And try to run that bad boy off. Have mercy, Lord. One thing about it, though, got to be careful how you hold the camera. You hold that camera over that check, and the screen will tell you, get closer. Sometimes it'll tell you, not enough light. Sometimes it'll tell you, fit your check into the electronic box that's outlined on your screen. Sometimes I get a little frustrated trying to get it just right. But once I line up with what the instructions say, it captures the picture immediately. And boy, when I turn that thing over on the endorsement side, the process is all the more fast. Whenever you stick to the instructions, because here's Sister Shauna, here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to be trying to take a picture of that check, and the picture don't work, and in frustration, I tear up the check. Oh, no. No, 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 no. And what some of us try to do in life, we say, Pastor, I tried to do it the Lord's way, and it didn't work. Truth is, it didn't work as quickly as you thought it was going to work. But the Lord is working, and you don't even know that He's working. Psalm 119 and verse 105 says, Lord, your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light on my path. That means if you stick to the script, He'll make your pathway bright. He will illuminate your steps one at a time. Stick to the script. Psalm 119 and verse 133 says, Lord, order my steps in your word, and let not iniquity have dominion over me. Psalm 119, verse 165, the entire 119th Psalm is dedicated to the importance of the Word of God. Verse 165 says, great peace have they which love thy law, and nothing shall offend them. Stick to the script. Now, you can leave out here all you want. Talking about, well, Pastor, my grandmama lived that Bible all her life. And look how her life turned out. Yes, look how her life turned out. Have you ever noticed that if you plant an oak tree, if you examine the structure of a tree carefully, especially in its early stages, there is more of the tree beneath the surface than that which erupts above the surface. You're looking at the wrong thing. You're looking at the leaves instead of looking at the roots. Stick to the script. The word won't lead you wrong. Hey, you got to know it if you're going to stick to it. And you got to read it if you're going to know it. You can't stick to what you don't know, and you can't know what you haven't read. Stick to the script. Well, Solomon, what is the final statement in your closing argument? It is this: payday is coming after a while. The Lord pays off. We have a number of employees here at our church, and I can't speak for people on other jobs. I can speak for the employees here at our church. When our paychecks are electronically deposited, I start singing, "Oh, happy day." I see I ain't the only one. I see some of my employees in the back. We be checking them phones to wait on the drop. And immediately the next day, we start looking forward to 2 more weeks. Because here's what we know. Payday is coming after a while. These are Solomon's statements in his closing arguments. Just because you got by doesn't mean you got away. Stick to the script. And then remember, payday is coming after a while. Look at what he says in verse 13 and verse 14. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Here's payday. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Payday is coming after a while. Payday is coming after a while. In Galatians chapter 6 and verse 7, Paul said to the church at Galatia, be not deceived. God is not mocked, or God is not to be toyed with. Whatever a man sows, that shall he also reap. Let me boil that down into 3 statements and I'm done. You reap what you sow. Okay, let me hit rewind. You reap what you sow. If you plant tomatoes, don't go back looking for cabbage. That's what some of us do. You clown. Treat people all kind of way. And then you get in trouble and you want the whole world to stand still in response to whatever your need is. One of the most valuable lessons I've learned, Sister Vanya, is to stop allowing other people's procrastination to become my emergency. So if you call me and say, Pastor, it's an emergency, to whom? Is it an emergency for you or is it an emergency for me? You reap what you sow. Here's the second one. You reap more than you sow. Nobody plants apple seeds and then searches the dirt for an apple. That's not why you plant apple seeds. You plant an apple seed to get an apple tree, and from that tree you desire to pick apples. You put a seed in the ground and a tree came up containing fruit with thousands of what you planted. You put one little seed in the ground. Whole tree comes up with whole apples full of seeds. You started with a seed, ended up with a tree. Be careful what you put in the ground, because when it comes back, it's going to be a whole lot more than what you put in. Be careful how you treat other people's children, because you are setting the stage not only for how other people will treat your children, but for a magnitude of whatever you planted. My colleague in ministry that I also consider to be a friend, I've known him for years, Reverend Dr. Jamal Harrison Bryant, is now the senior pastor of the New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. When he talks about his history, he struggled with a number of learning disabilities so that he had to drop out of high school before graduation. And his mom and dad sent him to Africa in order to free him from whatever mental bondage he was in. And he ends up at the Morehouse College, where the former pastor of the New Birth Baptist Church paid a portion of his tuition. Decades later, he is now pastoring the church that someone else seeded into. Be careful what you put in the ground, because you reap what you sow, and you reap more than you sow. Be careful how you talk about people when they fall. Boomerangs are strange. If you throw it, it doesn't go to your neighbor. It comes right back to the one who threw it in the first place. You reap what you sow. You reap more than you sow. Last second, I'm out. You reap later than you sow. Payday is coming after a while. Hey, I love verse 14. I love Galatians 6 and verse 7. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever man sows, that shall he also reap. That means if you do the wrong thing, some bad stuff going to happen. Be afraid. Be very afraid. But it also means if you do some good things, some good things going to happen. This past October, I had the phenomenal privilege of being the recipient of this church's appreciation as I celebrated 20 years of serving as your pastor. One of the byproducts of that was a family photograph with all of my remaining siblings. We had one to precede us in death and to go home to be with the Lord. But all of my remaining siblings were present at the anniversary banquet celebration, and we all gathered for a photograph along with my niece and nephew who live in Jacksonville. And my mom and dad were seated right there in front of us. And this past week, my brother Alex, he's 3.5 years older than me, was celebrating the fact, something I didn't pay attention to when I looked in the photograph, and it was a picture of multiple generations of children who all love God. This past week, my parents celebrated their 70th wedding anniversary. Seven. And I took my dad to his chemotherapy appointment this week. My brother Alex and I did it together. And people marvel when they see us, because often they see families and nobody's there with them. But my people, anywhere they go, us be there. We have to control ourselves. Really, we do. We have to control ourselves, because they will ask my mom or my dad, what's your date of birth? And we answer. What's your social security number? We answer. What medication? All of us got it on our phone. And when my dad and I were on the way home from chemo this week, he said, Kelvin, because that's what he called me. He said, Kelvin. It's not Kelvin. You can't spell it. It's Kelvin. He said, I want a Whopper Jr. He said, I want it with extra onions and no pickles. I said, yes, sir. Then we went by the pharmacist to pick up his prescription, and he said, I want a second one. He said, I want that one all the way with no tomatoes. I said, who that one for? He said, Mama. And then he looked over at me. He said, you want one? I say, Daddy, I'm going to want a double whopper with no onions and extra pickles. He said, all right. And he started reaching in his pocket to get his billfold. And I said, no, you ain't got to worry about that. You riding with me. And in response to all the years of you taking care of me when I couldn't take care of myself, please give me the honor of doing for you whatever you want me to do. Because you reap what you sow. You reap more than you sow. But you reap later than you sow. Payday is coming after a while.